Go ahead and get started. It's noon. Welcome, everyone, and thank you for joining us today to learn about the Preservation League of New York State's Preserve New York grant program for 2023. Today, we have a North Country focus, so we'll be talking about some examples of funded projects in the North Country. So I want to thank Erin Tobin at Arch for hosting us today. Adirondack Architectural Heritage is our host. Thank you, Erin.
Thank you, Jetta.
So as I mentioned, we are offering certificate maintenance credits and continuing ed credits for planners and architects today. This webinar is co-sponsored by the American Planning Association New York Upstate Chapter. AICP members can earn CM credits for attending. You must remain in attendance for the duration of the webinar to receive your credits. For more information about claiming your credits, go to planning.org/CM. We're also pleased to offer 1.5 continuing education credits for architects through the New York State Department of Education for participation in this webinar. Certificates of completion will be provided to architects seeking this credit, and you will be responsible for reporting and maintaining licensure. So again, if you're an architect or a planner in attendance today interested in seeking these credits, send me a chat with your name and your email address and whether you're an architect or a planner, and I will follow up with you afterwards. I want to thank the New York State Council on the Arts, our partner in our grant program, and the Robert David Lyon Gardner Foundation for their additional support, and the Hudson River Valley National Heritage Area as well. We're going to talk about the Preservation League grant programs today. We'll go over eligibility guidelines, what kinds of projects we fund, how to apply, and I will do my best to address any questions you all have. So if you're not familiar with the Preservation League of New York State, we were founded in 1974 by a group of grassroots preservationists who decided there needed to be a unified voice for historic preservation in Albany. We are headquartered in Albany, but we have staff all over the state. I'm coming to you from Binghamton, New York, down in Broome County. We have staff in Rochester, Schenectady, and Albany as well. We work in all 62 counties of the state. We are New York State's nonprofit working for historic preservation. We envision a New York State where our diverse heritage is valued and protected, and we empower all New Yorkers to use historic preservation to revitalize their communities, protect their heritage, and build a sustainable future. The Preservation League leads advocacy, economic development, and education programs across the state. If you would like to learn more about our programs, you can find them on our website, preservenys.org. We have a number of programs that we work through. We work with local colleagues such as Arch, and we work to empower local communities to use historic preservation for economic development and community revitalization. We work in advocacy at the state and federal levels to make sure that historic preservation always has a seat at the table when it comes to laws and bills that are passed that affect communities and economic development. We offer technical services on our website and via email and telephone. So if you have questions or wish for referrals or want to talk about topics relating to historic preservation, I'm here to help. We have our 7 to Save program. We shine a light on endangered properties around the state every 2 years and offer enhanced technical services and visibility and resources. We gather resources around these endangered properties. We offer excellence awards every year for historic preservation projects that are exemplary. So if you know of any projects that deserve a statewide recognition, get a hold of us and nominate that project today. We have our preservation book club on our website. We read a book every month and we meet to talk about it over Zoom. It's a lot of fun and it really broadens the conversation and brings in timely topics about historic preservation. Our Zabar scholarships support scholars in New York State who are studying historic preservation and related fields. It's a $2,500 scholarship, so not too bad. If you know of a student who could use this, please let us know and let the student know about our scholarship program. And finally, the Preservation League offers grants, and that's what we're here to talk about today. So the Preservation League's grant programs are a partnership with the New York State Council on the Arts. We receive additional support from the Robert David Lyon Gardner Foundation for projects occurring on Long Island. The Hudson River Valley National Heritage Area offers additional support as well for projects occurring in that area. So we're very grateful for these partnerships and the support for our grant programs. We offer 2 grant rounds a year: Preserve New York in the spring and technical assistance grants in the fall. And we'll talk about both of those grant programs. Our grants fund historic preservation planning projects. So these are often the very first steps in any historic preservation project. Let's start with technical assistance grants. So what do I mean by preservation planning projects? I'm talking about the first steps in a project that give you an existing conditions assessment of your resource and help you see a way forward for its repair or rehabilitation. We do not fund bricks and mortar. We don't provide capital money for your project. We only provide money for the planning process at the very beginning to jumpstart your project and get it off the ground. Our technical assistance grant program comes around in late summer with an October deadline. It's funded by NYSCA with support from the Gardner Foundation and the Hudson River Valley National Heritage Area. Our grants are open to 501c3 nonprofits and municipalities. These are units of local government, village, town, and county governments. You must own your building or have a long-term lease. And so for purposes of our grant program, a long-term lease would be at least 6 years remaining in your lease at time of application. If you lease your resource, the owner also must be a 501c3 nonprofit or municipality. So please keep in mind that we don't fund privately owned properties, state-owned properties, or properties that are owned by clubs or exclusive groups. Your building must have an arts or cultural purpose. This is specific to the Technical Assistance Grant Program. Your organization needs to be an arts or history organization, or use your resource to host arts and cultural programming. These awards top out at $4,000 for a $5,000 project. And for purposes of our grants, project refers to only the funded project, such as the historic preservation planning study. We're not talking about the whole capital project. So keep in mind, a $5,000 project is just that planning study. You're required to contribute a 20% cash match. On your screen, you'll see a ruin. Look at that wall. That is at Fort Ticonderoga. That is the remains of one of the original features of the fort. This is the Lower Town Smith's Forge wall, or what remains of it. This was part of the community that existed on the outside of the fort to help support the fort itself. Ticonderoga would like to stabilize this wall and make sure that it is properly interpreted in their programs. So they received a TAG grant last year for $4,000 for a condition survey of this ruin, and this will help them see how to stabilize it and bring it into their interpretive programs. Speaking of Fort Ticonderoga, they also received a pretty significant grant in 2022 from the Environmental Protection Fund. This is through the Office of Parks, Recreation, and Historic Preservation. They received over $390,000 to repair and restore the North Demi-Lune, a different ruin, one that's actually attached to the fort and was a fortification. They received a previous grant in another year for the restoration of that feature as well. Something to keep in mind about preservation grants, our TAG grants and Preserve New York grants, is that they help leverage capital funds on down the road. So you may get a small TAG grant from us, and this can help leverage big capital money later, either through state grants or other sources. A technical assistance grant gives potential funders a vote of confidence for your project. They can see that you have received a professional assessment of your resource, and you know what needs to happen, how it can happen, and what it might cost. So this is an important document to have. Speaking of documents, these are the documents that are funded through our Technical Assistance Grant Program. Accessibility studies look at how to make your building more accessible to the public. Pardon me. A building conditions survey looks at specific issues of your building. And these technical assistance grants are meant to be one-day visits from a consultant to visit your site, assess a certain aspect of your building or resource, and provide you a report on it with recommendations for repair or remediation, best guess cost estimates. This can provide a roadmap forward for your building. A building condition survey looks at specific issues. So, for instance, looking at just the windows in your building, providing a conditions assessment of your windows and recommendations for repair. An engineering structural analysis looks at structural aspects of your building. This may be completed by an engineer. The professionals that we recommend you bring in as consultants are preservation architects or engineers. We do provide a list of consultants who have successfully completed our projects in the past to help you find just the right consultant for your job. You're not required to choose from our list, but can we help you find someone who's well qualified? Feasibility reuse studies are also funded through TAG, and this is one of my favorite projects to fund because this looks at the adaptive reuse of a building or parts of a building or reimagining your use of space in your building. A feasibility reuse study can help you with interpretive plans and can help you with accessibility issues as well. A specialized conservation study. Now, don't get confused. Conservation is not used in the collections sense here. We're talking about the conservation of specific aspects of your building that may require a specialist's eye. We're talking about specialized building materials. I can use some examples. So we funded a TAG study for mortar one year. So there was masonry that needed to be repointed on a building. The mortar was very old. And the question was, can we use modern mortar mixes to repair this, or is there something special we need to do because it was a very old mortar? So that specialized conservation study looked just at the mortar and what was required to make the required repairs. We've also funded an acoustics study in the past. There was a performing arts group that was using an old church as a performance space, or at least they wanted to, but they couldn't because the acoustics were terrible. So they needed to see how to remediate the acoustics in the building without putting up big ugly panels that would detract from the historic integrity of the building. So the whole point of technical assistance grants and Preserve New York grants are to preserve the historic integrity of your building while making it usable for your purposes, while helping your building to help you meet your mission better. So through improved accessibility and usability and things like that. We've also funded historic paint analyses through TAG as a specialized conservation study. So there are lots of examples. We've funded a study of historic stencils in a building that were starting to peel and fade and crack, and they needed a specialist to come in and see what needed to happen to stabilize and rehabilitate those stencils. And finally, mechanical, electrical, and plumbing analyses. So this is intended to help you upgrade the mechanicals in your building to modern standards while preserving the historic integrity of your building. This can include fire suppression, HVAC upgrades. This is for the study only. We don't fund boilers or anything like that, but we fund the study, the feasibility. For instance, let's think about geothermal. Maybe you're exploring that option for heating and cooling your building. This study would help you understand whether geothermal was a potential fit for your organization. On your screen, you see this, the Great Camp Sagamore's main lodge in 2014. We funded a TAG grant of $3,000 for a risk assessment and fire suppression study of this building. It's kind of important for a log structure, wouldn't you say? This helped them determine the best way forward to protect their building from the threat of fire. Are there any questions so far? If you do have questions, please type them into the Q&A. I would be happy to address questions at any time. So you can feel free anytime something occurs to you, type it into the Q&A and I will answer your questions. All right. Technical assistance grants. Last year, we gave out 19 grants across the state of just over $68,000 supporting, let's see, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 project types. One was a hazmat remediation study. That's an example of a specialized conservation study. So sometimes, like I mentioned, things need a certain kind of specialist to come in and determine what needs to happen to remediate. In this case, it was for the Rare Center for Immigrant Culture, History and Culture in Kingston, New York, and they're looking to rehabilitate their upper floors. And as they began to do some work up there, they noticed that they were dealing with lead paint and mold and asbestos. And so they needed to know what to do with all of that and in what order to remediate. So this hazmat remediation study will help them do that. All right. Any questions about technical assistance grants? These are often the very first step and a jumpstart for your project. If your organization has limited resources or wants to take things piece by piece with your resource, or if you just have one concern with your building that you need to address, then technical assistance grants are ideal. They require very little investment on your part, 20% cash match, and the repair and remediation should be somewhat manageable from a TAG study. Preserve New York grants are the larger of our 2 grant programs. They top out somewhere around $20,000. We don't have a hard and fast cap to those. It really depends on the project. Preserve New York has been around for 30 years. This year, we're very proud of our grant programs and thankful for the additional support we received from the Gardner Foundation for those. Just like TAG, Preserve New York is open to 501c3 nonprofit organizations and municipalities. Just like TAG, you need to own your building or have a long-term lease with a 501c3 or municipality in order to apply. Preserve New York funds for specific project types, and we'll talk about each one as we go. Typical grant awards fall between $5,000 and $14,000, depending on the project, and you'll see that the projects that we fund through Preserve New York are fairly diverse. Some are more expensive than others. Along with a larger grant award comes a larger cash match. So you need to present a 20% cash match, and this is 20% of the project cost. And this year's deadline is in March. It's March 31st, and I will repeat that later so you can write it down. On your screen, you'll see the Buffalo South entrance light, also known as the South Buffalo Lighthouse. They received a Preserve New York grant last year for $14,000 for a historic structure report. And we will talk about what a historic structure report is in just a moment, but you can see the happy crew there with our Preserve New York banner proudly displayed. We're happy to be part of this project and anxious to see how it moves forward. Last year, we made 22 Preserve New York awards across the state, and that was out of 48 applications that we received. So not too bad as far as your odds. It varies year to year. Sometimes we get more or less applications. These are competitive grants, though. You're not guaranteed money, but we'll talk a little bit about how we evaluate these grants a little later. But we made just under $236,000 in grants last year for Preserve New York. The 4 projects that we fund are condition reports, cultural landscape reports, historic structure reports, and cultural resource surveys. Those are preservation planning projects specifically. Again, we don't fund capital or bricks and mortar. We only fund the very beginnings of your capital project. So before you apply, you want to think about how a Preserve New York grant fits into the great scheme of your capital project. Think about some of the steps involved in a capital project. Some of those steps are listed here on the screen, and you'll see the first 3 steps highlighted in green are what a Preserve New York grant can help you with. Can help with a condition assessment of your building. Before you begin, you may want an overall look at the condition of your building and see where to begin. A condition assessment can provide you a prioritized list of tasks and things that need to happen in order for the project to move forward. Your preservation planning study is your technical assistance or Preserve New York grant. Your Preservation League funded study can help with project prioritization and help prepare you to fundraise. You will have to fundraise to get this thing done. So your Preservation League funded project can help with that. You'll have to be aware of the following steps: plans and specs, contract bidding, getting the project off the ground, hiring the right people, overseeing the project all the way until it's completed. Those are things that our grants do not fund, but you can seek resources to fund elsewhere. So a few more things to think about before you apply for a Preserve New York grant is to think about how this potential project is going to fit with your organization's mission. So you may be pretty aware of how your building helps you meet your mission, but how does this project fit in with your organization's long-term strategic plan and mission? We love it when an organization has a fairly recent strategic plan that includes plans for their building. Because you are stewarding a historic resource, we want to see that you're thinking about the long-term maintenance and preservation of your building. So be sure and tell us how this project fits into your plans for your organization. And make sure that your board of directors is fully on board with this project. Make sure they understand what a Preserve New York grant does and does not fund. And be sure that they're ready to launch into full fundraising mode once they receive their PNY grant, because what we want to see is that you received your Preserve New York grant, you get your project finished, and you have a preservation planning document in hand, and you are ready to move forward with fundraising and capital projects, or embark on that list of prioritized repairs for the long-term planning of your building. And finally, make sure that you're dedicated to hiring qualified building professionals. This is easier said than done, but one of the things that a Preservation League grant can do is connect you with consultants who can help you find qualified building professionals. Having a preservation architect on your side can really help when it comes time to start working on your building. You will have that document in hand, you'll have that professional advice to help you guide your contractors on the work that needs to be done in your building. This is very important. All right. So the first of the 4 project types that we fund through Preserve New York is a conditions report. We used to call these building condition reports, and sometimes we still do, but they don't always occur on buildings. Sometimes they're bridges, sometimes they're other kinds of historic structures. So a condition report is a comprehensive conditions assessment of your structure. Top to bottom, inside and out, it gives you a real thorough view of your building's overall condition and its needs. This can be tailored to meet your individual building. So if there are aspects of your building that are more concerning than others, you can certainly talk to your consultant and make sure that they're focusing on those areas of your building that are most in danger. What they will provide to you is an existing conditions report, along with a prioritized list of repairs that need to happen, best guess cost estimates. These are things that can help you move forward with your project and help you get the work done. On your screen, you see the Westport Train Depot. In 2019, we funded a building condition report for this building. And this is a neat example of some real cooperation between an arts group and a town and even Amtrak. So this was an active Amtrak station owned by the town of Westport. The Depot Theater Group acts as the caretaker of the station. They staff it 2 hours a day. They have performances in the building, and they've been excellent stewards, working along with the town. They've been excellent stewards of this building. In fact, they received an excellence award from Arch in the year 2000 for the restoration work that they had done on the building. So they had a track record of careful stewardship. Their Preserve New York grant funded a conditions report that aligned closely with their 2018 strategic plan. We love to see that. They had a real plan for this building, working closely with the town, And they had a number of goals for this report. So the report was instrumental in providing a roadmap forward to help them fundraise for the care and repair of their building. The scope of work included identifying eligibility requirements for Amtrak's Great American Stations program. So sometimes your preservation planning study can help you participate in programs that will benefit your building and your organization. It can lay the groundwork for that sort of thing. This report also informed ongoing work by the town to create a historic district that would include the depot building. So the town had a plan that aligned with the theater group's plan for the building to protect it and provide for it long term. And finally, their plan was to use the conditions report to help coordinate some planned Amtrak platform work that was to be done, the town's repaving of the driveway, and the theater's planned tech improvements. So this preservation planning document really hit a lot of bases for the Depot Theater. So we're proud to be part of the story of this building. Another example from the North Country of a conditions report comes from Saratoga County. The town of Corinth had recently acquired the International Paper Company's Administration Building and Time Office. Look at this cute building listed on the National Register of Historic Places, which they did to ensure the long-term care and protection of the building. The town began thinking about potential uses for this building. And they did an internal study, decided that the best use would be to house the new Hudson River Mill Museum to interpret the history of the paper industry in the North Country. So they received a 2018 TAG grant to support a building conditions survey focused on stabilizing the building. So they received some early recommendations to make sure that building was stable and could then be looked at for adaptive reuse. Their 2019 Preserve New York grant of $10,000 supported a building condition report, an overall look at the health of the building with prioritized recommendations for its adaptive reuse as a museum. So congratulations to them. What an adorable building. Great. So the second kind of project that we fund through Preserve New York is historic structure reports. A historic structure report is pretty much the same thing as a conditions report, except that it has the addition of historical research about the building's architectural and social history. So if you're looking to interpret your building to the public and you need additional information about its history, historic structure report can be particularly useful. Another good use for a historic structure report is to prepare a building for listing on the National Register of Historic Places. So if you're looking to list your building as an individual structure on the National Register, then a historic structure report can provide a lot of the information you need for that nomination. The example that you see on the screen is from Washington County. The Friends of Camp Little Notch are a group of former Girl Scouts who got together and purchased an old Girl Scout camp to preserve it for posterity. They loved their time that they had spent there and they wanted to preserve that land. It's about 300 acres and it contains this furnace structure. And the photo on the left shows the furnace being depicted in hieroglyphs on the back of a stone chair. This chair was part of a map of sorts for enslaved people seeking freedom in the North. And so as they passed through this area, they could see some of the landmarks that they needed to look for to guide them on their way. And this furnace was one of them. So wow, what a connection to history this has. And so this historic structure report will help the Friends group interpret this structure for the public and preserve it for many years to come. Another example of a historic structure report is from the County of Clinton for their Old State Road Bridge over the, please tell me if I'm mispronouncing this, over the Osable River. Sorry, I'm not from the North, but this historic bridge is listed on the National Register of Historic Places. It was built in about 1890. It's a double span wrought iron Pratt pony truss bridge. And it was possibly constructed by the Groton Bridge and Manufacturing Company. The Old State Road Bridge has been closed to pedestrian and vehicular traffic since 2005 due to safety concerns. So rather than demolish it and replace it with something modern and characterless, the county is looking to preserve this old bridge. You don't know how rare that is to have a county government. All Sable. Thank you. All Sable. I will remember that. Thanks, Erin. So it's over the Sable River. So the county is looking to preserve this bridge. This is great. So the communities of Sable, Keysville, and Chesterfield expressed interest in preserving rather than demolishing this old bridge. And the county is going along with their desires. Clinton County is also overseeing the rehabilitation of the Stone Arch Bridge in Keysville. So yay, Clinton County, they're doing the right thing. And we've received an uptick in applications and inquiries about preserving old bridges. I think, these old iron bridges are starting to get old. And as municipal governments look to replace them with something more modern, local residents are saying, hold on now, this is a historic resource that we would like to see preserved and maintained. So we were really happy to provide a $12,000 Preserve New York grant to conduct a historic structure report of this bridge. All right. Another example from Lewis County. This time is a little more a traditional historic structure report. This is for the General Walter Martin House for the Lewis County Historical Society. So they wanted a historic structure report to guide the long-term maintenance and preservation plan for this house, and also to inform their historic interpretation to the public. So pretty much that's exactly what a historic structure report is meant to do. And so a 2019 Preserve New York grant will help them do that. Any questions about historic structure reports or how they relate or how they compare to a condition report, anything like that? Please remember, if you have questions, don't be shy, type it in Q&A and I'd be happy to answer your questions. All right, cultural landscape reports are similar to historic structure reports, but these focus on a particular landscape, also known as historic landscape reports. They're meant to help in the preservation of historic and cultural landscapes. This includes an existing conditions assessment and a description of the historical significance of the landscape. Oftentimes, we have funded cultural landscape reports when there were drainage issues on site, and if they were going to need some intensive work done for drainage, but we're concerned about disturbing the cultural landscape, then a cultural landscape report can help guide that work. We have funded cultural landscape reports for cemeteries on very rare occasions. So cemeteries are kind of a tricky thing. They don't tend to be owned by 501c3 nonprofits and municipalities. Sometimes they are. We funded a cultural landscape report for a cemetery in Tioga County that was experiencing some erosion and runoff issues due to some excessive rainfall some years back. And the town of Owego had partnered with the Friends of the Cemetery to provide historic walking tours and publications about the history of the cemetery and the people who were laid to rest there. So they had some arts and cultural programming tied into the cemetery. A 2018 Preserve New York grant helped them envision repairs that would preserve the historic walkways and plantings and monuments in that cemetery while providing a remediation for their drainage issues. So that's one example of how a cultural landscape report can help. So we like to talk about how Preservation League grants can help leverage other grants for your project. And here's a good example. So from Long Island, Old Westbury Gardens. Back in 2007, they applied for a Preserve New York grant for a historic landscape report. Look at that historic landscape, but it looks like it's missing something, doesn't it? So Old Westbury Gardens wanted to add back in some historic features to their landscape. So a Preserve New York grant helped them plan for that. In the meantime, they received a couple more grants from us, a P&Y grant in 2017 for a building condition report, and a TAG grant in 2021 for a condition study of their thatched cottage. They have a number of buildings, one of which is a little cottage they use in arts programming with a thatched roof, and they needed to know how best to preserve that thatched roof. So the conditions study brought in a specialist to look at that and see how best to preserve it. But just last year, in 2022, they received an Environmental Protection Fund grant through the Office of Parks, Recreation, and Historic Preservation for $200,000 to restore their gardens. So sometimes things take a number of years to happen, but eventually they got around to leveraging that Preserve New York grant from 2007 and the recommendations made therein to do some restoration work on their gardens. So congratulations to them for having a good plan and sticking with it. If you'd like to read more about how to leverage Preserve New York grants, you can read about it on our blog. Last year, we did a little study looking at Environmental Protection Fund grantees. And for every $1 that they had received from us in grant money in previous years, they received $13 in state money for their capital projects. Wow, that's a big deal. We're very proud of that. And I hope that you feel inspired seeing what is possible from a Preservation League grant. Now, finally, I'd like to talk about cultural resource surveys. A cultural resource survey is not a site-specific study. This is an inventory of historic resources in a particular area, in a municipality, a village, or looking at particular kind of historic resources in an area. And I'll provide an example of that in a moment. This can help determine what kind of historic significance is there in your village, whether it be historic significance at the local or state or national level, architectural styles, patterns of development and industrial development, settlement patterns. And this often lays the groundwork for the creation of a historic district at the local, state, or federal level, usually state and national historic districts. That's what we fund the most. That's what we see the most come in through our grant applications. So on your screen, you'll see some images from Franklin County. The Malone Revitalization Foundation received a Preserve New York grant in 2021 for $9,150 to fund their cultural resource survey. This came on the heels of a 2017 Preserve New York grant to the Malone Chamber of Commerce that funded a cultural resource survey of their downtown commercial district. So that commercial district was listed on the National Register of Historic Places in 2021. So bam, they immediately applied for another Preserve New York grant, and they got it to list a contiguous residential district. So what this does, I'll talk about what it does in a moment, but this is a community benefit that they're going for. A municipality, when they are planning for economic development, will often look at listing an area on the National Register of Historic Places to provide historic and provide financial incentives for historic preservation in their town. Another good use for cultural resource surveys is in municipal planning regarding disaster preparedness. If you have an inventory of your historic resources ready, if disaster were to hit your town in the form of a flood or a landslide or something, when FEMA comes in to help, you have this list already. You say, here are the important buildings in our town that need particular attention. These are the buildings that are important to our citizens, and they're the ones that we want to see preserved and protected. And when they're looking to tear down buildings that are beyond repair, they may take a second look at those historic buildings to try and save them. So this can really help in long-term disaster planning in a municipality. Another example of a cultural resource survey in the North Country is from Clinton County, the town of Schuyler Falls. I believe this is the second Preserve New York grant they've received for a cultural resource survey. So oftentimes these surveys are phased, and we fund one part of it, and that part gets done, and then we'll fund another part, such as happened with Malone. All right, so when we're talking about phasing cultural resource surveys, we're talking about the particular levels of survey. Oftentimes these days, a reconnaissance level survey, which is the overall look at the historic resources in an area to see really what's there. Is there anything of is there anything where the with good historical integrity remaining? What kind of resources does an area have? What do they date to? And then an intensive level survey just takes that a step further with a little more research on individual properties, settlement patterns, things like that, and instead sets the stage for a state and national register nomination later. Oftentimes, the Preserve New York grants that we give fund these first two, usually together, and then the municipality or the group will come back and apply for another Preserve New York grant to fund the National Register nomination phase. These surveys can also lead to local district designation, although that's a little more rare, but could happen. Surveys are important for that as well. So being listed on the National Register of Historic Places is largely honorific. This is to highlight the historic, cultural, or architectural significance of resources in your area. The National and State Register of Historic Places programs are coordinated through the Office of Parks, Recreation, and Historic Preservation in New York State and through the National Park Service at the federal level. And these work hand in hand. When you make a nomination for a district, it goes through state review first, makes the state list, and then federal review. Almost always the federal listing follows. You can have individual listings or district listings. We do not fund nominations for individual buildings, but we do fund for historic districts. And it's important to keep in mind the difference between a local historic district and a national register historic district. There are some really important differences, mostly being that a local district is subject to local oversight with the intent of preserving the character of a community, whereas National Register listing is intended to preserve an area from acts of government and to make sure that your resources are protected from things like road work and changes that are brought on from the federal or state government. So what does it mean for property owners to be listed on the National Register of Historic Places? Well, it means access to financial incentives for historic preservation to help make maintaining and preserving your historic property more affordable. These are through federal and state historic tax credits. As long as you're located in a qualifying census tract, which in upstate New York, almost all of us are located in a qualifying census tract with very few exceptions, and you're in a historic district, then you have access to these tax credits. This also opens the door to grant opportunities, not for individual homeowners necessarily, but for nonprofits and municipalities. So it's important for municipal planning to have your historic districts listed before you need them to be. Good planning, looking long-term for economic development and protection of your historic resources, being listed on the state national register can help you take advantage of opportunities that are available. All right. Are there any questions about cultural resource surveys, how they're done, what they mean, how they're funded, anything like that? I'd be happy to answer any of your questions. Surveys are one of the largest expenditures of grant money that we have. We fund a lot of surveys across the state, and these are part and parcel of smart economic development in a community. All right, so I hope you're all excited about applying for a Preserve New York grant. It's easy to do so, and here are some of the steps involved in applying. The most important being to read the guidelines. So our guidelines are available on our website, and the guidelines are important. They point out what we fund, what we don't fund, how we evaluate your grant application, and things that are allowed is in your project. I encourage applicants to share our guidelines with their consultants so that they understand too the grant program that you'll be using to pay them. Preserve New York and TAG grants provide fees for those consultants, so it behooves them to understand how best to frame their scope of work to make sure it falls within our guidelines. We have a pre-application available on our website, and that pre-application is a simple form. It takes only minutes to fill out, and it's to help us determine the eligibility of your organization to apply, the eligibility of your building, and the eligibility of your project. If all those things check out, then I will send you a link to the full application, and that will help you get started. It is possible to preview the full application once you receive that link. You can print it out, you can share it with your board, get prepared to apply. Make sure that you contact your consultant nice and early. They get busy, and you want to get on their schedule more sooner than later so that you get the things that you need from them to apply for your grant. Start taking photos of your building. Make sure that they're good photos. We require at least 5, but no more than 10 photos for a Preserve New York application. The more the better. We want to get a good look at your building and its needs. We'll talk a little bit about photos in a moment. Preview the application. Like I mentioned, you can preview it before you begin to fill it out. You can click through the whole thing. You can print it out if you want, read it carefully, and start compiling the attachments that you're going to need to apply. So what I always recommend is that you have a folder on your desktop where you stash all the attachments you're going to need for your application. These attachments can include things like your list of board of directors with names and affiliations. So we want to know who your board is, who the people are on your board. We need to know that to make sure there are no conflicts there. So be prepared to provide a detailed list of your board of directors. And other attachments as we go. Some of them will come from your consultant, but compile those in a folder. That way, when it comes time to submit your application, it'll be easy to do so. Right. So read the grant guidelines. I'll say it again. Read the grant guidelines. Please read them. I can tell if you don't. So if you still have questions after you read the guidelines, that is perfectly fine. I'm always really happy to answer your questions and clarify anything that doesn't make sense to you. But please read them, because then you'll understand our finer points of eligibility, your ownership requirements of the building, our evaluation criteria and process. So when we are evaluating grant applications, we are looking at 3 criteria, and they're listed in the guidelines, but I'll tell you what they are. We look at historic preservation, excellence, and project quality first. So that is how appropriate is the project for your organization, for your building. Are you prepared to take on this project? Does it make sense in the grand scheme of things? And for project quality, we're looking mostly at whether or not you've chosen an appropriate consultant for your project. Like I mentioned before, we provide a list of consultants. When you submit your pre-application, I'll send you back a list of consultants. That way you can start talking to them nice and early. Talk to a few and talk to them about what you expect from this project, what you're hoping to achieve, what your long-term goals are for your building. And listen to what they are planning to do as their scope of work. Make sure it aligns with your expectations. If it doesn't, ask them questions. Choose somebody who's appropriate for your project. Make sure that they have the right kind of experience and background. You can look at their website. You can look at their portfolio. We do require a resume from the consultant. No matter how well we know that consultant, we want their resume, because I'm not the only one looking at your grant applications. We have an entire panel of reviewers, usually about 5 people, professionals from all around the state. They look at your application and they grade it and they review it. They may not be familiar with the consultants that are on our list. They may not be familiar with your site at all. So it's important to be clear in your application about your choice of consultant, and make sure that it's an appropriate choice. You'll see definitions of the project types in our grant guidelines. So if you forget what the difference is between a cultural resource survey and a cultural landscape report, don't worry. They're defined in the guidelines, and there are also links in the guidelines for additional reading about those project types. So if you want to see really the nitty-gritty of what is involved in a condition report or in a historic structure report, you can do some additional reading and learn about those. You can also see a little bit about the grant's funding priorities. Every year we reassess what we're really looking to achieve through our grant programs. So we have some funding priorities listed. If you meet those priorities, then it'll give you a leg up on your application. You can read about those in the guidelines. You'll also see your responsibilities. What do you need to do to hold up your end of the deal when you sign that grant contract with us? And finally, deadlines. We have 2 deadlines for each grant round. One is the pre-application deadline, and the other is the full application deadline. We accept pre-applications to within a week of the full deadline. So we don't accept any pre-applications in that last week leading up to the deadline, because we want you to be better prepared than that. So please get your pre-application submitted as soon as you can. And that way we can start talking about your project and we can get you on track to put your best foot forward in your application. All right. So submit your pre-application as soon as you can. Like I just said, this will get the full application into your hands so that you can read through it and prepare to apply. This also, the pre-application also introduces me to your historic resource. I may not be familiar with your organization or your building. The pre-application helps introduce that to me. I can do some reading and some researching in the meantime and learn more about your organization before I receive your application. That's good. So, you can even give me a call and talk about your project if you'd like. If you're not familiar with the league and we are not familiar with you, in addition to submitting your pre-application, you can call me and we can talk about your project if you have questions about it particularly. So again, you'll receive a consultant list when you submit your pre-application to help you choose the right consultant. Talk to your consultants early, discuss your project and your long-term plans with them. Let them know what documents you need for your application. Let them know this early. Even if you share the grant guidelines with them, don't expect them to actually read it. I hope they do, but tell them what you need for the application. Tell them early. We need a scope of work. We need a schedule of fees, and we'll talk about budget in a moment. And we need a resume from them. If they're not on our list of consultants, I also would like to see, along with their resume, a portfolio showing that they have experience with historic buildings. We have received excellent applications that had chosen consultants that were nationally renowned for their work, but had zero historic preservation experience, and that's bad news. We don't want to see big name architects called out. We want to see people who are used to working with historic buildings and will make the appropriate recommendations for your structure. So when it comes time to take photos of your building, choose a nice day with good lighting, like as if you were welcoming guests to your site. I want to see your building in the very best light possible, no pun intended. So take good quality photos, make sure that they're straight, make sure you're not chopping off pieces of the building in your photo. I've seen some of those. Get someone to help you take photos if you're no good at it. Don't worry about it. Just get somebody with their iPhone to come out and take excellent quality photos of your building. What we want to see is an overall view of the whole building. I've seen applications that did not have a single photo of the actual building, just pieces of it. So make sure there's at least one overall view of your building so I can see what it looks like, so I can see its context. If it's a survey, make sure you take streetscapes, sweeping streetscapes showing the proposed area of the study. And then narrow in on areas of concern for your building. We want to see the ugly stuff. I know you don't want to show us the things that are in bad repair, but that's the whole point of this grant, is to help you fix that. So show us the things that are concerning you about your building. Why do you need this grant? For a survey, show us some noteworthy specific buildings that you're hoping to feature in your survey that you think are worthy of being highlighted in a national registered district, if that's your goal. Plan to submit at least 5, no more than 10 photos. And finally, provide captions and credits. So we've made it easy for you in the application. You upload your photo and then you type in the caption and photo credits right under it. Super simple. We want to know who took your photos and what we're looking at. If it needs some clarification, please provide that. Remember that the grant review panel members may never have seen your site before. So you want to make sure that we become very familiar with your building, with your site. while we're reading your application. Preview that full application before you start, and that just gives you an idea of what to expect. It's probably one of the easiest applications you'll ever fill out for a grant, in my opinion. It's entirely online. You can click through it before you start. Share it with all of your team members who are going to be working with you on this application. If you have a couple of people who will be working with you on it, make sure that they're aware of what's needed. If you don't understand something, call me. If the online platform is confusing, give me a call. I'd be happy to walk you through it. Always happy to do that. So when you submit your pre-application, you will receive back from me a link to the full application, and that will take you to this page. And you can see that there are a couple of options on this page. If you've never applied to Preserve New York or to the Preservation League through Smarter Select, that's the name of the platform. If you've never applied through Smarter Select before, you will need to create a new account. And you can see that circled in green. Make sure you do that before you try to log in. If you just try to log in, it won't let you and you'll be confused. If you choose to sign in with Google, you can see the red button. You can choose to sign in that way if you want, and your Google account will sign you in. That's fine too, but make sure that you are consistent, that every time you sign in, you do it the same way, either with your email address and password or through Google. Because if you do it one way and then try to do it the other, it won't work. And I've received lots of frantic phone calls right before the deadline of people who say, I can't sign in. And it's because they hadn't signed in a few weeks and they forgot exactly how to do it. So make sure you write down your login credentials and use those same credentials every time. Once you log in, create your account, you will see this page. It describes the Preserve New York Grant Program. And down at the bottom of the page is a little blue button that says preview. You can hardly see it, but it's there. If you click that, that will allow you to walk through the entire application without having to fill any of it out. You can print it, you can share it with your board, you can save it on your desktop. If you really wanted to, you could print it out, fill it out by hand, but you cannot submit it that way. If you want to do that just for your own, you can do that, but you eventually need to fill it out online and submit it online. Okay, so just so you know. But sometimes it helps to have a printed version of it to refer to, right? So you can do that if you'd like. Once you're ready to start, go ahead and click the green apply button and you can start. At the bottom of each page, there's a save button. It's like this preview button, this little preview. It's not easy to see. I think it's even grayed out. Please click that at the bottom of each page as you work to ensure that you're saving your work. All right. I don't want anybody to lose their work. You can work on your application bit by bit and come back to it and work on it some more. You don't have to do it all in one fell swoop. Just make sure you save your work. Okay. All right. I want to see great narratives. I want to be excited about your project and excited about your organization. So we're going to require a couple different short narratives from you. One is going to be a program narrative. Basically, what are your arts and cultural programs? What was your attendance for the last year? Were these online or in person or a combination thereof? How many people showed up? Who are your partners in your programming? If you have outside organizations that come in and do arts and cultural programming, we want to know about that too. We want to know about all that stuff. We want to know what your organization is doing from an arts and cultural standpoint. So get us excited about your mission and let us know, answer the questions thoroughly. Another narrative in the application is to describe your project. So we're talking about the historic structure report or the cultural resource report. Why do you want it? What's it going to do for your organization? How's it going to help with your long-term planning for your resource? Describe that project. Aside from just the project, we do want to know about your long-term plans for your building. So how does this Preservation League funded project fit in with your long-term plans? Tell us what your plans are and how it all fits together. Get us excited about your project and your long-term preservation plan for your building. All right, so we're going to ask for two budgets from you. The first is the organizational budget. It's easy. It's a statement of your organization's finances, income, and expenses for the year. All right, we want to see where your money comes from and how you spend it. In that organizational budget, we want to see where your 20% match is going to come from. So it doesn't matter where it comes from, just so we see that you have it, you're good for it, you've got your 20% match all ready to go. You don't have to have it all in hand yet if it's part of a future fundraiser, things like that, but we want to know that your organization is well prepared to present that 20% cash match, and we want to know where it's going to come from. Municipalities, please don't give me a 52-page budget for your municipality. We've received those before, they're no fun. Just give me a one-page summary of the income and expenses for the department that's going to be responsible for this grant. So whether it's the planning department or the parks department or that one line town historian, you know, and you're going to take all of their money for that 20% cash match. I hope you don't do that. But anyway, we just want a one-page summary of the income and expenses for the department that's going to be in charge of signing that check and making sure that this grant money is properly spent and overseeing that project. All right. The second budget we're going to want from you is a project budget. So your project budget is going to be a breakdown of the expenses that you'll be paying to your consultant to do this project. That's how you'll spend this money, on consultant fees. That's it. So your Preserve New York grant cannot be used to cover staff time or overhead or anything else. It's purely to pay your consultant to do the project. But what we want from you and what you need to get from your consultant is a breakdown of their tasks and deliverables and their fees. We want to know how much they're charging per hour. Sometimes your consultant will have a junior member of their firm work on part of it. We want to know their hourly rate as well, what they'll be doing. And we want to see your contribution to the project. Your contribution will be your Preserve New York ask. We are asking $8,000 from Preserve New York. So that's going toward the project. We are also providing a 20% cash match, and that is coming from here, and there it is. If you have donations that are coming in specifically for this project, go ahead and let us know. Honestly, if we see a fundraiser in the community or donations from your community toward this project, that shows projects or community support. And we like to see that. One of the three evaluation criteria for your application will be service to the public. And part of that is community support for your organization, for your project, that the community cares about your building and what's going to happen to it, and that you're engaging your community, letting them know, okay, so we're applying for this grant from the Preservation League to jumpstart this project that's going to repair our building, or it's going to prepare it for a new use or something like that. And we want to see that the community is informed and engaged with it. You can provide support letters in your application to show that. We don't require support letters. There is a section at the end of your application for them. It's not a requirement, but boy, we like to see them because it helps us understand how the community views your organization and this project. Contributions to the 20% cash match from the community are welcome as well. So just something to keep in mind. But yes, this project budget, very simple. Your consultants' fees, tasks, deliverables, and totals, and your contribution through your Preserve New York ask and your 20% match, and where that has come from. Any questions about budgets? Those are the two budgets. We don't have a budget form. You can upload this. What I recommend is that you do a simple Excel sheet, save it as a PDF, and upload it in your application. You can also just type it out in a Word document, save it as a PDF, and upload it. I think Smarter Select accepts PDFs, maybe Word documents, but PDFs are best. Okay, so, all right. And if you have any questions about applying to our grant programs, please ask. I'm always happy to talk to you. I'm always happy to answer your questions. You can email me at grants@preservenys.org. You can call me directly, and we can talk about your project and answer your questions. The deadline for Preserve New York this year is Friday, March 31st at 5 p.m. I don't want anybody staying late on a Friday working on this application or working on it over the weekend. So get it in by 5 p.m. that Friday and then go out and celebrate. Your pre-applications are accepted until a week before that. So Friday, March 24th. So at the very least, get your pre-application in by then. It should be in a lot earlier than then though. All right. So I hope there are questions. I have left plenty of space for questions. If there are any, please send them my way now. This webinar was recorded, so you can watch it later if you missed anything. You can also share it with all your friends if they want to know how to apply for Preserve New York grants. It'll be available on our YouTube page. You'll receive an email from me in the next couple of days as follow-up with these slides to refer to later and with a link to the recorded webinar. If you do have any questions, feel free to reach out to me. Always available. Keep up with the the Preservation League of New York State online. We have a very active social media presence. We have a lot of great stories to tell through the projects that we fund, through our 7 to Save program, through our Excellence Awards and Pillar Awards. So, follow us on Instagram and Facebook and see all these great stories that we have to tell. All right. So I'm going to invite Erin back, if she's still awake, to add anything that I may have missed. Hi, Erin.
Hi, this was great. Thank you, Jana. I know some friends from Indian Lake are here, and I want to kind of reiterate for everybody who's tuning into this webinar, this is a great program for leveraging additional funds. And I know Jana talked about this, and the $1 to get brings in $13, but I just want to underscore that how important these funds are to getting future funds, whether they're future capital funds or other funding sources. And those cultural resource survey grants here in the Adirondacks, we're going to be launching our Adirondack Rural Revitalization Program, which will fund capital restoration projects, so exterior rehabilitation, bricks and mortar, like the kinds of projects that the Environmental Protection Fund will give grants for. The Adirondack Rural Revitalization Program requires that the building be on the National Register or in a historic district. So now is a really great time to look towards potential historic districts and think about applying to Preserve New York for a cultural resource survey or historic district nomination, so that your buildings or potential projects for these capital grants can be teed up during the application, which will be happening through 2023. Later this spring and early summer. So I want to make a little plug for that as a complement to this program. And while these applications are open and while you're thinking about funding in your community, this is a really great opportunity to kind of take that next step and get 80% or up to 80% of the project funded.
Right. Erin, I have a question. You mentioned that the resources have to be listed on the National Register to be eligible. Is a determination of eligibility acceptable, or do they need to be fully listed by then?
Great question. By the time of the application deadline, which we anticipate being in May, if I recall, we haven't issued the call for applications yet. The site will have to have a determination of eligibility. It does not have to be listed by the time of the application, but we need to know that it could be listed and that there is an eligibility determination. And the State Preservation Office has said they will turn those eligibility determinations around in about 45 days, specifically for this program. So a community could apply for a National Register Historic District, go through the eligibility process, and for the district or their building, and then pursue the district. But by the time that the project is done, the district or the listing has to be on its way. So it's kind of tight timing for a district, because those usually take more than a year. But really, the projects that will be coming to us this year will really be underway in 2024 at the earliest, because they have to be completed by 2025.
Great, good information. And these surveys do take a little bit of time. So yes, please, get underway a little more sooner than later to get your foot in the door on these great opportunities. So it's good to know.
Yes.
All right. All right. So I will be hosting a series of drop-in help sessions. So if you get started on your application and you want to talk to me one-on-one about your application and get some help with it, you can check our website, please, our Preserve New York page, and you can sign up for these Zoom drop-in help sessions where you'll get one-on-one help with your application. It's a lot of fun. We usually have a small group of between 4 and 6 people show up talking about their projects. We learn a lot from one another, and you get your questions answered. So please consider that as well. All right. Well, Erin, thank you so much for hosting me today. This has been a lot of fun, and I hope it's been helpful to our attendees. Look for this follow-up email in the next couple of days with the slides, and let me know if you have any questions about applying. Always happy to help.
Thank you, Jana. Thank you for doing this. We appreciate the North Country focus, and hopefully it brings in more applications from this region. I
sure hope so. Looking forward to seeing them. All right.
Yes.
Thank you, everyone. Bye-bye.